Welcome to the Space Startup News live stream. I do this live stream every week at the same time. So thank you for joining if you're here live, or if you're rewatching later. Thank you for watching it. So first of all, let's show this banner here. So I'm on X. I have an X account at Space Startup Hub, so please follow me there. I post more videos there and occasionally post or reply to posts. So thank you for that, and let's launch directly into the first video of this week, which is on Deep Space Energy, which is a Latvian startup offering power as a service. So I came across this company only last week, I think, and they're a spin-off from the University of Latvia. So they're based in Riga, Latvia. They also have another hub in Coventry in the UK, so that's why you can see the graphic here. And basically they're working on RTGs, are radio isotope thermoelectric generators. So basically you have these unstable elements that break apart, and they fire these electrons or alpha particles at very high speed, and they hit the surrounding material, which heats up, and you generate a small amount of heat. So you can think of RTGs as hot rocks in a box. So basically they're great for heating units. For instance, you could heat up a lunar rover or lander during the lunar night, and just using RTGs doesn't require the sun. It's a natural process that radioactive materials do. They undergo decay, and you can harness that for heat. In addition, if you use a thermocouple, which is just a very simple device, no moving parts, it can generate a small amount of electricity from the thermal heat. It's around 5 to 7%. So it's just a matter of 10, 20, 50 watts, something like that. And so you can generate thermal heat, you can generate electricity, and you can also use what's called a Stirling engine, which has a piston, and you can bump it up to maybe 20%. And we have David in the house. Thank you for joining, David. Nice to see you. So yes, so basically with a Stirling engine, you can bump the amount of electricity from maybe 5 to 7% all the way up to 18, 20. And Deep Space Energy is saying they can get 25% efficiency from their system. And you can see it on the left here. There's their system. And notice it has one piston here rather than two. Two's normal, so they've managed to design it with one, which is fewer mechanical parts, less to go wrong. So they reckon it's more reliable. And they said this piston is reliable for like 17 years. Which is quite a long time. So I think I knocked it. Okay. So here's their system. It's called RTA Lig. I don't know how you pronounce it. That's how I pronounce it. And one unit can produce 50 watts. They say it's 25% efficient using one piston, and this unit weighs 22 kilos, and you get 50 watts. And you can stack these units together. So they're saying if you've got 10 of these units, you could generate 500 watts or half a kilowatt of energy. And they do say they are multi-fuel or fuel flexible. They could use, I've got a graphic here. Let's see. So yeah, they're using strontium-90, americium-241, and plutonium-238. So I think a lot of the commercial space startup companies working with RTGs will use strontium-90. It's quite cheap. It's available in relatively large quantities from spent nuclear fuel. You reprocess the fuel, and you can, via various chemical processes, you can get out various different fuels. Strontium-90 is available from the US. The European fuel reprocessing plants can produce strontium-90. So I think this is what a lot of the companies will use. Xenon Power, American competitor, is using strontium-90. Deep Space Energy is using strontium-90, and another company called NTX, I think, is probably going to use strontium-90 as well. The downside is the half-life isn't great. It's 28 years, which means every 28 years you lose half of the material through radioactive decay, so your power level drops by half and so on. But 28 years is still a really long time. So it's abundant, you get a decent amount of power, and it's pretty cheap. Compare it to plutonium, which is very expensive, available in limited quantities, and most of that's probably going to NASA or to the US government. So I think it will be very difficult for commercial companies to get hold of plutonium, and it is very difficult to deal with. And of course, it's potentially like a nuclear proliferation problem. So I think companies probably won't use plutonium. But another very promising radioisotope is americium-241. NASA is definitely interested in using this, and Zeno Power is working with NASA and some other companies, I think Blue Origin, working on some kind of nuclear battery using americium-241. If you look at the graphic here, 432 years half-life, which means this thing will work forever, for centuries and centuries, no problem. So anyway, those are the potential radioisotopes you could use, and this graphic here shows what I think the commercial companies are working on RTGs. So Deep Space Energy, which is based in Latvia, and their system is called RTA-LIG, and you get 50-watt modules. Multiple fuels can be used. It's in development, and it's funded by ESA and NATO Innovation Fund, I believe. And their system is highly efficient, 25%. Then you've got the American company Zeno Power. I've done a video on them already. They're working on nuclear batteries. Strontium-90 for the moment, but in the future, they've got a NASA grant. They'll be working on americium-241, and they're not far from commercial development, commercial entry into the market. Maybe this year, 2026, or next year, and they're funded by the US Department of Defense or Department of War and NASA, and they'll be the first to market, I think, for sure. And there's another company I just recently heard about called NTX. They're based in Australia, and they're working at the moment just on the heater units. So that's just hot rocks in a box. You put the radioisotope in a container, and it generates thermal heat. That's it. It's not disclosed what fuel they're using, but probably just strontium-90. And yeah, they're based in Australia. So that's the company. And so iSpace, which builds lunar landers, and you can see there's iSpace US. So they have an office in Japan. They have an office now in the US, which is building a larger, bigger lander. And I think they have a CLPS mission, a Commercial Lunar Payload Services mission. So they want to survive the lunar night. You drop this very expensive asset on the moon, and it's dead within 2 weeks, because once the sun sets, your solar panels don't generate any electricity. So if you had a nuclear battery, then you could survive the lunar night. You may not be able to do any work because you don't have enough power, but just the thermal heat would allow you to survive. And with a small amount of electricity, you could do telemetry, for instance. You could be pinging from the Earth. Maybe you can do some sensor information, and then when the sun rises, you have a lot of power. You can continue your mission. So that's the idea. So that's on the left is the CEO of Zeno Power that makes nuclear batteries, and on the right you have a representative from iSpace US, which is building this larger, I think it's called Apex lunar lander, that will send NASA payloads. So yeah, hopefully they can survive the lunar night. And we actually do have a graphic of what the rover could look like. So you can see at the front here you have a Zeno Power battery. So it can actually, I don't know what it can do during the night, but it certainly survived the night. And maybe it can move around as well. So anyway, let's have a look at the roadmap. This is from their website. So basically they've got a proof of concept already that's completed. They're working on a functional validation demo next year. that will be 25% efficient. And then they will have a demo for Lunar and Mars rover applications. So technology readiness level 5, 2028. Then 2029, a tech demo mission in orbit. So this is being launched. They're going to demonstrate it works in orbit. And then 2030, commercial operation, hopefully. Energy supply with a commercial system. So one thing I've not mentioned that I should mention at this point, bring myself up, is they are not selling hardware. They are selling power as a service. And one of the reasons, I don't know if this is the only reason, but one of the reasons is it's very difficult to get all the regulation, the licensing for nuclear batteries to sell, because it is a nuclear material. I think it's a controlled substance in Europe. You need licensing from the EU. You need it from Euratom. There's an IAEA, the International Atomic Energy. I don't think it's authority agency, but anyway, there's lots of these licensing regulations. So rather than transfer ownership to the customer, they will retain legal ownership of the system throughout the life cycle and just sell the power to the customer. And once the customer's finished, they can then serve another customer. So legally, it just makes it's a lot easier for them to just retain ownership of the system and then just send the power, just serve the power. So that's their business model. And let's have a look at what people are saying. Bring up the comments. Put myself in the corner. So Ryan Block B5 is saying, thank you for not using a computer voice. Your voice and accent is part of your brand. Thank you very much. Yeah, it's all my voice. And Will EQ7UH, Pluto not a planet, downvote. Well, I'm a big fan of Pluto. I'm in the Pluto fan club. So as far as I'm concerned, it's planet number 9. And Tiberius Maximus is saying 2 kilos for 50 watts. A flexible solar panel weighs less and produces 100 watts. Sure, when the sun's up. The issue is when the sun isn't up, right? This is, in the case of the moon, 50% of the time there's no sun. Solar panels don't generate any power. So you can't build a lunar economy when the economy only works 50% of the time. You need to be able to function when there's no sun, there's no solar power. So that's why you need other systems, nuclear reactors, RTGs, and other systems that work without the sun. So let's move on to the second story this week. If I can bring it up here, here it is. And this is a video I've meant to do for a while, but I just saw some kind of article in Space News or something. And as usual with these articles, it's always like radiation is a problem. It's a big problem, and it only gives you one side of the story. It's like here's all the risk, and they forget about the reward, and they forget about the human body's ability to protect against radiation and repair radiation. So that's why I decided to do this video called NASA's Radiation Obsession is Killing Mars Dreams. Do you think Isaac Miller's goal of a lunar base by 2030 is even achievable? Well, thank you, David. So I think they want to drop the first elements of a base. I think that's what they're saying now is the very first element, and then we've said we started the base by 2030. So the base is really the multi-purpose habitat, which is being built by the Italian Space Agency. So that will be dropped, and that's like a roving habitat. It's got wheels, you can move it around, and that is the base. So you'll have a rover, you'll have a lunar terrain vehicles, and you'll have, well, I think that's all I'm aware of at the moment. It's definitely rovers have been built. There's going to be a multi-purpose habitat. There's going to be a nuclear reactor by 2030. So you'll have a few elements, and then you can say, okay, that's a base. Yeah, Christian's saying there are some spots on the moon that get sunlight 95% of the time. The dark pause is very short. There are, I think, There are a few peaks of eternal light, they're called. So peaks of eternal light is you get sun illumination at least 80% of the time, and then something called true peaks of eternal light, which get sunlight 90% of the time, over 90%. And I think the rim of Shackleton Crater is one of those locations. It's like 92% of the time. So yeah, I mean, those are the places you'd go to first, and you use solar panels for sure. But you don't want to be limited to just those locations. You want to be able to explore the whole of the moon, especially with rovers, right? Rovers are going to move around. They're going to be in shadow. They're going to be at the bottom of a slope where there's not a lot of sun. So to explore, you're going to need to have other sources of power other than solar. So that's the idea. And definitely for Mars, with the dust storms, you can't rely on solar panels. You need nuclear power of some kind, probably a nuclear reactor and nuclear batteries. Going to Mars and only relying on solar panels is a disaster waiting to happen. So anyway, so let's have a look at the NASA's model. This is very simplified. Yeah, and as David said, one of those elements for the Artemis base camp is supposed to be a nuclear reactor. So I think it's got to be at least 100 kilowatts or more. And this is something that has to happen quickly. And this is so they can have an exclusion area around the nuclear reactor, which basically keeps out the Chinese. I think it's more to do with that than anything else. But a nuclear reactor would be really very valuable. It would generate a lot of power. And so it's a very, very good asset. And Christine is saying it is true. Not all mechanical tech can be powered by solar power. You want a mix. You want nuclear. You want fuel cell regenerative systems. JAXA's lunar cruiser, for instance, will have fuel cells. So if you've got hydrogen and oxygen, you can combine them to generate electricity and water, and then you can split them again. So you can keep doing that. So fuel cell, batteries, backup and storage. You'll have RTGs, nuclear batteries. You'll have nuclear reactors, and maybe there's other power systems as well. So this is the model. As you can see, it's very simple. Basically, they studied atomic bombs, very, very destructive events. And then they drew a straight line all the way to the origin, and then that's the risk of getting cancer. Basically, the cancer risk from atom bombs is very high, and it is never zero unless there's no radiation. So, as it says in red here, no safe level of radiation, and this is the key thing to get from NASA's model and NASA's approach. There is no such thing as a safe level of radiation. And therefore, according to NASA, they have from this they have the ALARA principle, which is as low as reasonably achievable. Because no level of radiation is safe, they want it to be as low as possible while still being able to do things. So, in addition, they have a career limit for astronauts of 600 millisieverts, which isn't much at all. For instance, if you were to travel to Mars, just going to Mars and coming back from Mars, that's 300 millisieverts. That's 50% of your career limit just traveling to and from. And if you spend a year on Mars, and I think I actually have the graphic here. So 150 on the outbound leg, another 150 millisieverts of radiation exposure on the way back. And if you spend a year on Mars, that's 245. You're almost at your career limit with a single mission to Mars. So it's interesting to note that ESA, the European Space Agency, has a radiation exposure limit of 1 sievert or 1,000 millisieverts, which is quite a bit higher than NASA. So NASA is very strict on radiation exposure based on a very old model called the LNT model, the linear no threshold model, and it has a lot of implications. So let's have a look at the implications of NASA's approach to radiation. and the Rolara principle. First of all, it requires heavy shielding because no safe level of radiation. And the heavy shielding means the increased mass of the space vehicle or habitats, and the heavier mass means longer transit times, which means more radiation exposure. And when you get to your location, you can do less science, you can do less exploration, you can do less base building, because the astronauts can't spend long there because of radiation exposure. So it's just very difficult or impossible for the human settlement and exploration of the solar system with NASA's stringent approach to radiation. There just isn't enough time to spend on a planet or a moon to build a base, to do discovery or scientific exploration because of the radiation exposure. So that is the problem. And I do use the analogy of the water tsunami analogy. That is, the reason tsunamis, which is giant killer waves, are so dangerous is the rate of water. It's enormous amount of water that kind of overwhelms people, which causes them to drown or whatever. It's the same with a large amount of radiation. It overwhelms the human body's natural ability to repair radiation damage, and that's what kills you. Small, chronic, low rate radiation, the body knows how to deal with. It deals with that all the time, and it will repair strand breaks, single strand breaks. It can kill a cell if it's too damaged. So this happens all the time. The human body is exposed to radiation from food, from radium gases, from cosmic rays. So the idea that there's no safe level of radiation is just wrong, according to the medical studies. Under 100 millisieverts, there's no documentation, there's no studies to say that it's dangerous. And Christine is saying, before we address the radiation problem on Mars, we need to solve how we're going to deal with Mars having average temperatures on the planet of minus 40, minus 45, minus 46 Celsius. Well, we have to deal with that problem on the moon as well. So I think even NASA agrees that for a Mars camp, we're going to need a nuclear reactor. I think it's part of the baseline design for Mars. There's going to be a nuclear reactor, and that's to do with the dust storms, I think. So, yeah. So if we look at it like a Mars camp here, so you'd have habitat, you'd have a rover, and yeah, you'd have this basic Mars camp. So I think you'd have a nuclear reactor for Mars for sure. So another thing we can talk about, if I can bring it up, is nuclear electric propulsion. So Jared Isaacman, the new NASA administrator, is very keen on having nuclear power and nuclear transport. And specifically, he mentioned nuclear electric propulsion. And there are two good reasons why you'd want to use this to travel to Mars. Because it can help cut radiation. The first way it helps cut radiation is it cuts transit times in half. So rather than spending 6 months or 9 months traveling to Mars using chemical thrusters and being exposed to radiation every day, you can get to Mars in 150 days. So that cuts your radiation exposure in half on the outbound leg and on the return leg. And of course, you need less mass because you need less supplies to the crew, because you get to Mars quicker. And the second way it helps is with all that onboard electrical power, which would be hundreds of kilowatts and maybe megawatts, you could power a shield, a magnetic shield that would deflect incoming galactic cosmic rays. And NASA's done studies on this. With a magnetic shield, you can probably deflect 30 to 70% of incoming radiation. So you can cut radiation exposure by 75% using nuclear electric propulsion. So this is something that we definitely want. And here's another render. So your habitats at the front, you have this mechanical struts, this metal struts, and then you have the reactor at the back. So the crew are away from the radiation. Here's a reactor, and you could travel to Mars using this method. And this is a graphic I did from another video on nuclear propulsion. But you can see the middle row, fast transit to Mars. Your nuclear reactor size would be 0.4 to 2 megawatts. And this Gen 2 nuclear reactor could power fast crewed transit to Mars. So the idea is your Gen 1 is the reactor you're going to put on the moon. It's a basic, maybe 100 kilowatt reactor. So once you know how to build that kind of reactor, you can then go into Gen 2, which would be more powerful, in the range 400 kilowatts, maybe up to a megawatt or two, and that could power a nuclear spacecraft that would get you to Mars in maybe 3 months. And with all the onboard power, you could have active shielding as well. And this is another graphic I have from my nuclear video. And basically, you have two kinds of nuclear transport. You have nuclear thermal propulsion and nuclear electric propulsion. The NASA administrator, Jared Isaacman, is very keen on NEP. And the reason is, first of all, it supports long duration missions. And it's very good for science missions because the onboard electrical power can power a lot of scientific equipment and sensors and so on. And as I just said, it can be used for active shielding as well. And Christine's saying, but a magnetic field that strong has negative effects on a nuclear, on human blocks of the nervous system and basic blocks of our nervous system. So I've seen documentation where you can shape the magnetic field. So rather than it being spherical, you can shape it so it has lobes, basically. So if you shape it in a certain way, you can shape it so that it doesn't affect your human habitat. So it's very directional. So yeah, I've not dug into that, but I think there are ways you can, you shape the magnetic field so it doesn't include the human habitation areas. So but I'm not an expert on that. So that is the second video I did on on NASA's approach to nuclear radiation, which I think is very problematic. The human body can repair radiation as long as the flux isn't too high. Below a certain critical threshold, the damage can be repaired by the body's natural repair mechanisms, and the body will upregulate those defense mechanisms when there's chronic low rate radiation. So in the case of Ramsar, Iran, which I include in the video, this has natural background radiation in some areas of 200 and 260 millisieverts. So I know some of the comments saying, well, actually it's 20. Well, it depends on the area. So there's some areas where the radiation is quite low, say 10 or 20, but there's certain areas that are 260. There's a reason I include the hot springs as part of the video. The hot springs have radium gas, which percolates into the springs, and the radiation level is very high. So that the radium then is deposited, is concentrated, and that material is actually used for building materials for houses. So there's some houses in that area that have radium and have very, very high levels of background radiation, higher than the surface of Mars. So there's been some studies, and the result is that there is not only is there no damage to the chromosomes actually have less damage than people who are not in that radiation area. And the reason is the body upregulates its defense mechanisms against radiation. So actually, low-level chronic radiation is beneficial for humans. It actually prevents cancer. It doesn't cause it, it prevents it. And that's what the studies are saying. So low-level radiation, which is what you'd get if you were traveling to Mars, is something the human body can handle. Now, some people saying I oversimplified the video. Yes, it could have been twice as long for sure. So galactic cosmic rays are mostly single protons, not a problem for the human body. They cause single strand breaks that can be repaired. You do get like 1% that are heavy ionized particles. So You can think of protons as like very small bullets, and then you can think of the heavy ions as like cannonballs. These are much more damaging. They can cause double strand breaks. They can cause a lot of collateral damage, and it's more complicated for the body to repair. So definitely there's a higher risk with those kind of particles, and it's possible the body won't repair them efficiently. So there is an increased risk if you go to Mars. But even according to NASA, the increased risk is 1.03 to 1.1, the normal cancer rate. So only 10% at most extra risk. And that's according to NASA's model. So what I say in the video, there's many ways you can die going to Mars, which are far more acute and extreme and will kill you straight away. From launch to transit to entry, descent, landing, then surface operations, then a tear of your spacesuit, habitat leak, poisoning from the Martian soil. There's many ways of dying on Mars. And basically I say, like, if you don't want to take any risks, then don't go to Mars. Being on the final frontier is not for the timid or those that are don't want to take any risks. Right? You're only going to expand into the solar system if you're willing to take the risk. And I think a risk of 3 to 10% increased cancer risk is well worth taking to settle on another planet. So that's my opinion anyway. Yes, so I have here, if I bring it up, these are the studies. Basically, if you look at the very last highlighted sentence, it says low rate radiation of medical imaging has no documented pathway to harm. So that's the key point. NASA's model is just wrong. It says there's no safe level of radiation. That is just wrong, according to medical studies. And this is in the Journal of Nuclear Medicine. Yes, so Christine is saying a lot of people do get confused with solar radiation and nuclear radiation. They are not the same. Similar, yes, but not the same. It's all to do with the kind of particles. So you can get gamma radiation, which is just electrons. They're fast moving. They can penetrate the skin, but they don't do a lot of damage, which the body can repair. And then you get these heavy ions. You can get what called basically a helium nucleus, so two protons, 2 electrons. They can't get through the skin, but they do more damage. And then you get these heavy ions from cosmic galactic radiation. These are iron and silicon particles. They're very heavy, very damaging, but they're only 1%. Then you got solar flares, which are kind of like tsunamis in terms of water analogy. The flux of radiation from a solar flare is just very high, and it can kill astronauts in minutes. So you need to be in a storm shelter. You need to protect yourself from a solar flare, otherwise you'll die. And David is saying, bit of a weird question, but are there any companies trying to make radiation-hardened electronic components? It's such a big problem with avionics design, and radiation testing is extremely expensive. Yes, there are definitely companies working on that. There are radiation-hardened components already. The problem is they don't perform as well as the cutting-edge components on Earth. But yeah, NASA uses a lot of those radiation-hardened components, definitely for its deep space missions and so on. So yeah, they are available, and companies are working on them. I'm not, off the top of my head, I can't think of any companies working on them. But yeah, radiation-hardened components is a thing for sure. And this is the paper on Ramsar. If you look at the last highlighted sentence, showed significantly reduced frequency for chromosome aberration of people living in high background. So this is the conclusion, is the opposite of NASA's model. It's saying reduced damage, reduced chromosome damage from people living in high background areas. So when the radiation is higher than on Mars, there's actually less damage to chromosomes, not more, which is the opposite of what NASA is saying. And that's because the body upregulates its protective mechanisms and repairs damage at a faster rate. So that is the opposite. And the first sentence says, receiving an annual radiation absorbed dose from background radiation that is up to 260 millisieverts, and on Mars it's 245 millisieverts. And of course these people don't have radiation protection, so even without any radiation protection there's no damage to human health with low rate chronic radiation. So anyway, that is my take on radiation. So what are people saying? Let's go through the comments. Put myself in the corner. Actually, I want to be there. Okay. So Dum Trulangam 1721 is saying, interesting, yet they are talking about having nuclear reactors on the moon. The reality is, if we are going to go into deep space and beyond, then there is why we need to start looking properly into making some kind of magnetic field to protect our astronauts. Precisely, that's what we need. But it just so happens Jared Isaacman, he wants to work on the one technology that is perfect, and that is nuclear electric propulsion. It means we can get to Mars quickly. It opens up the outer solar system for scientific exploration, because we don't need to do gravity assist. We can do direct trajectories to the outer planets. We have a lot of onboard power for sensors and scientific equipment, and we can power a magnetic field, a shaped magnetic field that will deflect cosmic background radiation. So unlike, we don't need to deflect 100%. If we deflect 25, 50%, we cut radiation exposure. And then we have Han Solo saying they use robust old chips, things like 2-core 4 threads Intel CPU, like Core 2 Quad or STH. So yeah, they basically use old hardware, but that's not efficient. Companies really want to use the very latest. For instance, orbital data centers, you can't use old equipment. You'd have to use the latest NVIDIA chips. So I'm not sure how they're going to handle radiation. You could just have software tolerance. Basically, you get a bit flip and then you just reset the calculation, do it again. I don't know. And then Christian saying, did we already overcome that effect with gold foil carvers? That slowed down the elemental penetration so that the slowdown will make bounding effect take place, and then the subparticles become too big. Yeah, there's various materials you can use. And for instance, for solar flares, you can orientate the spacecraft to put as much mass between the solar flare and the where the humans are. The humans would be in a storm shelter. So there's various things you can do to cut exposure. You don't have to go to zero. You just have to cut it, and the human body will naturally repair some radiation. And of course, you can use antioxidants as well. If you know there's a solar flare coming, you give the astronauts, protection, antioxidants, and so on. So we have Joe Gojin saying, I am so glad we have an administrator that isn't stuck in the old ways. I am sure Jared will be aware of this and refocus on the more important problems that you pointed out at the end. Yes, there's many more very more immediate ways of dying while traveling to Mars. Cancer is just one of the risks. It's a long-term risk, and the risk isn't that high. The chances of successfully landing on Mars is no better than a coin flip. It's 50-50. So half the missions fail and half succeed. So that's where I would concentrate on landing successfully. I don't think you need a lot of tech for nuclear protection, to be honest. And Flotsam Mike is saying the background in Iran is 20 millisieverts, not 200. Well, I just pointed out the medical. Let's have a look at the medical thing. If you read the very first sentence in this paper, very high background radiation. It says background radiation that is up to 260 millisieverts. Now, Now, Flotsam Mike isn't wrong that there are some areas that are 20 millisieverts for sure, but there are also some areas that are 260 millisieverts, and people live in those areas. So you make good arguments for changing all the safety regulations for nuclear reactors. The types of radiation they would encounter in space and on the surface of Mars is more dangerous to your eyes. A 5 millisieverts acute dose of all types of radiation will kill 50% of the population in 30 days. Well, 5 sieverts is 5,000 millisieverts. So obviously, acute radiation, everyone agrees, would cause acute radiation poisoning and would kill you, for sure. What we're talking about is chronic low rate radiation. That's all we're talking about. Obviously, for solar flares, they're extremely dangerous and you need to protect the crew. But for galactic cosmic radiation, it's around about 1 to 2 millisieverts per day. That's the level. It's not high at all. It's just continuous. So using the unit of sieverts means you are using a dose conversion factor that you criticized. So basically, there's two ways of measuring radiation exposure. The sieverts and Gray. One is the amount of exposure, and the other is taking into account biological factors. For instance, alpha particles can't get through the skin. The skin blocks them. So sieverts take account of that, and they weight the exposure. So in terms of gamma and X-rays, the rating factor is 1 to 1. A sievert and a Gray are the same thing. So galactic cosmic radiation is mostly just protons. So it's only the heavy ions that are really dangerous, and they're about 1% of the radiation. So the Department of Energy surveys of career radiation workers that were used to detail the theory of radiation hormesis, that's basically the body's ability to repair, shows a distinct drop in life expectancy as lifetime exposure exceeds 250 millisieverts per lifetime excess. There's lots of studies. I quoted the study from Ramsar, that's 260 millisieverts, and there's no damage. In fact, the damage is reduced because the body upregulates its mechanism. So, I mean, there's different studies, but the point is that the risk is relatively low compared to the other risks, such as landing safely on Mars, which to me is a much, much higher risk. Then we have Blue Steel saying, comparing water to radiation exposure is silly. There's apples and oranges comparison. I don't really think it's apples and orange. The point is high flow rate of water or radiation is extremely dangerous and will kill you. A high flow of water, a tsunami, is extremely dangerous. A low flow of water, such as rain, is not dangerous. You could be outside in rain every day, every year, and the chances of drowning are 0. That's the point, and it's the same with radiation. Hans Solar is saying, I think ISIS is fairly well shielded. They are current Mac laptops and iPads. Well, the International Space Station has the benefit of the Earth's magnetic shield, which you wouldn't have on the moon, in deep space, or on Mars. So once you're outside the Earth's protective magnetic shield, you're subject to more radiation from galactic cosmic rays. And we have Christian saying that would be like saying that radiation is more likely to give cancer to individuals who do not recover from radiation in comparison to individuals whose body reacts to IT and deal with radiation better. So I'm saying that for Mars, there is some increased risk of radiation, but it's not that great compared to the other risks. And if you want to work on the final frontier, if you want to be on the final frontier and push it backwards, you have to take risks. There's no conservative, safe way of expanding human presence into the solar system. You have to take risks, and if NASA's not prepared to do that, then other countries will. That's my point. And then we have Lennon Lover saying, my 2 favorite options to combat radiation exposure is either underground lunar bases in lava tubes or to cover above ground modules in radiation. Yeah, so I agree with that. For the moon, you really do want to cover your habitat with regolith. So either you dig down and place your habitat underground, or you just cover the habitat with regolith. But or you find a lava tube or a pit or a cave or something like that, because you want to basically protect yourself from radiation, especially solar flares, which are very, very dangerous. And we have Nefertiti's Forge saying, "You've convinced me, brother. Thank you, thank you." So I mean, either we want to operate on the final frontier or not. If we think a 10% risk of dying is too much, I don't think NASA should be operating on the final frontier. It should stay in low Earth orbit and just not go into deep space, because there's no safe way of settling Mars or going further without taking risks. And I think cancer is, to be honest, way down there. There's a lot more greater risks, in my opinion. Anyway, that's basically everything I wanted to say. I've covered all my points. So thank you for joining if you're watching live. And if you're watching later, thank you for watching this video. And I'll see you next time.